Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Working in Hockey Show. I'm your host, Nick Bowins, and today I'm very excited to be joined by the Assistant General Manager of the New York Islanders, Chris Lamoriello. Chris, how's the summer been so far? Hopefully you're getting a little bit of a break there.
Well, I appreciate being on, Nick. Thank you for having me. And the summer is underway. It's a quick summer, as we all know in the industry, but it's underway and things are going well. Thank you.
So I'm glad to hear it. I'm super excited to dive into your career and journey throughout the game here, Chris. I want to take it all the way back to kind of the start of your career here to kick things off. Obviously, played hockey and baseball in college there and made the transition into scouting with the New Jersey Devils initially. Take me back to those early days of scouting. What was life like on the road, getting those reps in, finding players across North America?
Well, it was a much different time. When I started, which I believe was 95, 96, so came on board in the summer of 95. Everything was different. We didn't have GPSs in the vehicles. We didn't have the social media like we have. Central Scouting at that time was led by Frank Bonello, and they were mailing things out to you, physical mail. They weren't emailing. I started doing paper reports, written reports at that time. And then probably halfway through, or maybe when I got to training camp, we started on computers. And David Conti was in charge of the staff, ran the amateur staff, did a great job for a long, long time, would be in the Hall of Fame if they had one for scouts. But most of the staff was on computers. The Devils were very far ahead in trying to create that new technological asset for record keeping. There was a number of teams that were on computers, not all of them. So when I started, basically based out of New England, you at that time there was a lot of draft eligible players in college. And the three big areas, and still are, you've got Europe, Canada, and then the United States. But back then it was really just the CHL, the NCAA, and then the European uh, leagues and tournaments aren't as great as they are now. So the World Under 18, I don't believe had started just, or they may have had it, but not as many teams were involved in the tournament. I don't think Canada was in the tournament. I can't remember exactly when they joined it in April there. So you basically had a less of a spectrum of places to go. It was more focused on those leagues. Now everything is spread out. There's players coming from everywhere. As you know, in the United States, the way the NHL has expanded, you're seeing like Austin Matthews and some of the different players that have been born in some of the non-traditional hockey markets because of the NHL teams being there. So it was different, but a lot of it's the same. The job was very similar. Going to games, letting the players tell you who you should be interested in based on the way they would play. Certainly, you'd follow the teams that had success, no matter where that was, and no matter what league it was. And again, it was different, but very much the same. And for me, not having a lot of background in scouting, very fortunate to be around some really good people on our staff who had a lot of success. Most of those people played or worked with a junior team or had coached at one point. So they had a background, just like my dad did when he coached in college, of team building. So you had to scout, you had to recruit, you had to acquire the talent, whether it was sign the talent or trade for the talent, draft the talent. So very lucky. It was a very experienced group. I was one of the younger people. I was the youngest person, and that was the reason the opportunity came for me, was because of my age and them wanting to have some younger people around. So I was very, very fortunate. It was a great group to work with. The Devils were having success at that time. They just won us the Stanley Cup, and we're getting ready to win a couple more in the next, 8 or 9 years. So we were lucky. We had good picks. And I think yes, it was in 1995 that the last organization to do it. They'd won the Stanley Cup and the Calder Cup. So back then the rules were different. You didn't have a salary cap. Not that we spent a ton of money, but you could keep your players longer. Free agency, I think, wasn't until 30 or 31. So you were keeping your groups of players together longer. But we had a lot of players that did move on. that played successfully in the NHL. Maybe they weren't able to play with the Devils, whether they were trades or so a lot of draft picks came through, and it was a really great time to start.
Yeah, like you said, I'm sure the game on the ice has changed a lot since then with scouting and what teams look for. But like you said, the off ice writing paper reports and the travel completely different then than it was today. And interesting on winning the cup and the Calder. There, we were close with Carolina this year, but the
Yes.
Devils are still the last one to do it there. Tell me a little bit about the transition into more the hockey operations role and running the team in Albany there, Chris. What was that transition like from scouting to more of an overarching hockey operations role? How did your duty and position kind of change there?
Well, it was unknown. Like you mentioned earlier, the games changed as far as the business. So back then, you didn't have assistant general managers. You didn't have most of the time the NHL general manager had the same title in the minors. So, we didn't have a large staff in New Jersey. It was basically the scouts and my dad running the team. So, when things started to get a little busier for him, he wanted to have someone more readily available for the minor league coaches to work with, for the players, and to have a little bit more support on the hockey side. Because at the time, we did not own the American League franchise. That was owned by a private group in Albany, Walter Robb and his son, who owned the team. And they were very good people. They were good to work with. And, that hockey presence, if you will, and that link just to help connect the two teams a little bit more. And again, the time, because staffs weren't big. So when I started that, I think that was in 2001. And I really didn't know what I was doing in the sense of how to manage time because I was still scouting as well. I was still full time amateur scouting till I think 2004. So that was my last World Under 18 tournament, which was really my last year of amateur scouting. So I did both. And back then, the duties weren't as great as they were today. Similar to your coaching staffs, where you have 3 and 4 coaches behind the bench now. Back then you only had 2. So our coaching staffs have grown. I think when I started, we did not have a video coach. We trainer on each side. Then we added another trainer. We added a video coach when we moved to Lowell in 2006. So it started to evolve where the players and the coaches, because of, I think, the technology, and you speak to scouts and what they look for today and how we blend in analytics and we look at all the other supplemental information that's out there. That was really part of it. So as the duties came, also the workload. And I think that's really what, my dad was thinking about at that time, that we've got it more work that, or information, I should say, not more work. There's going to be more time that's we're going to have pulled from us in some different directions to make sure that we're on top of everything as we can. The rules were starting to change. And again, I don't know if he sensed anything. He probably did, knowing how he was always forecasting down the road. But at the end of the day, the salary cap came into play. For the 05-06 season. Unfortunately, we lost the 04-05 season, to a lockout, and then the new system came into play. So once the salary cap came into play, obviously there was a whole new way of building your team, knowing that your team might not be able to stay together, because as your players began to grow, so would their salaries. Not like they did in they would do that in the past if the player and the team had success, but now there was a cap. Now you had to move your chess pieces around the board a little bit more strategically, as opposed to thinking that, we've got this runway that's going to last as long as we need it. So you had to forecast a little bit differently. So again, when you got those duties, got more involved, obviously, on the business side, particularly when we moved to Lowell, because that's when we purchased the team and we had to take over that franchise, from 360 degrees, from owning the franchise on and off the ice, going in there and setting up our own business. So I was lucky to be able to work with some people again where I learned quite a bit. So when I look at that transition, there was a lot more learning there than there was maybe, contributing, getting ready for what we have today, which is there's so many different things to look at and make sure that you're servicing the players, the coaches, putting them in a position. The food category is completely different now. That's totally grown from having maybe sandwiches and bagels and yogurts and fruit. Now we're working with nutritionists daily. We're programming almost at the minor league level, almost 2 meals a day. And at the NHL level, you're basically doing all the meals. So there's a lot that goes into making sure the team is ready and their focus is just on hockey.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point on how much front offices have expanded and, had room for smart people in each domain to be able to kind of share their expertise and take it over. And that's great for a brand like working in hockey. So we hope it continues to expand and evolve there as well. But I got to say, that Albany River Rats logo, is that not one of the best logos of all time?
Well, it certainly is a logo that you look at from some different perspectives. And I wasn't around when they created the logo. That was with the independent owner there. I believe Al Lawrence was the first ownership there. And it certainly was a logo that created a lot of attention. I think it still probably has a little bit of a cult following, which is fun, and that's I think what's pretty cool about the minor leagues is you're able to create a little bit of attention in some different areas, and certainly the logo is one way to do it. And we were lucky; we had a good logo in Lowell as well. We put together, in my opinion, a really good logo. So, that's the fun part when you're working with some minor league teams and some transition, whether it's cities similar to Bridgeport to Hamilton, and you get to be part of and see the evolution of the next phase of something. And so that's been fun. And obviously, the third jerseys in the NHL. So, to your point earlier, there's certainly a lot of diversity in these front offices, not on just the hockey side, but the business side. I remember in New Jersey, we hired a programmer, I think in 1997, which back then it was probably unheard of. We created our own scouting system that launched in 99, 2000. So again, we tried to make sure we were as far ahead of some things as we possibly could be, knowing that technology was in general in the world starting to create a bigger and bigger footprint. And why wouldn't you want to use that as an asset for your organization?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that is, one thing that's always been said about those Devils teams and organizations was very forward thinking and open to new ideas and different perspectives, and I think that that's something that both you and your dad gets a lot of credit for there with the Devils organization, and obviously a great successful and long run there with New Jersey, Chris, and then joining the New York Islanders in 2016 as the director of player personnel. After such a long run with the Devils organization, what was that like joining, a new role, a new organization? What did that first year look like on the island for you?
Well, it was very different, but again, I was very, very lucky to be around some quality people, and that's been one thing I can certainly say. And my 30 plus years in this business, I'm lucky to be in the business still. Obviously, working with my dad in New Jersey, the success, David Conti, Marcel Pronoval, Claude Carrier, the coaches we had, Jacques Lemaire, Larry Robinson, Robbie Fatorik, Pat Burns, Jacques Leperrier. I mean, I could go on and on. Hall of Fame people. Certainly the players lucky enough to be around. A lot of them are in the Hall of Fame and numbers retired, like Stevens and Brodeur and Niedermeyer, Danico. When I went to New York, it was very different, but there was a lot of similarities. And back then, the Islanders had a smaller staff. So when I was able to go there, and I was very lucky that Garth Snow took a chance on me at the time. Charles Wong owned the team, was a great man, great individual. I had meaningful work there, and the first year was really learning the organization. Garth was very very patient. Dougie Waite was there at the time, and Jack Capuano was the head coach. Greg Cronin was there. Bobby Corka, Mike Dunham, just a lot of good people to interact with. Kenny Morrow on the scouting side, and Trent Klatt and Velo Cowton. And so they made me feel comfortable right away. And it was very easy for me to be myself there, and then also have a chance to learn something different in the regard of an organization that was in a little bit of a different spot. We had come off a lot of success in New Jersey, played in the Stanley Cup Finals in 2012. Um, and left, obviously, like you said, and joined the Isles in 2016. And they were on the cusp of a really good young group of players, Anders Lee and Brock Nelson. Garth made some really good trades with, Nick Leddy and brought in Cal Clutterbuck and Johnny Boychuk. They had drafted some good young players that were in Bridgeport at the time. So I got a chance to work with Brent Thompson, who I didn't know. And that was more my second year. But the first year, I spent a lot of time around the NHL team, learning the organization, went through a coaching change. Garth made a change, I think, in December. They had the longest road trip in Islander history, I think, which was 9 games. I was on that trip and almost made the playoffs that year. Started, I think, last in the league around Thanksgiving, and I think we lost the last game to lose the last playoff spot. So it was quite a turnaround. It was an unbelievable experience that first year, but got to learn the players and the organization uh, without really knowing them, only playing against them, and really learning to appreciate Josh Bailey as a part of being on the same side as he, as opposed to playing against him. So that was what I appreciated about that transition. And again, so easy to work with the people that I was there with. And then the following season had a bigger role in Bridgeport, and started to take over those same duties that I had in New Jersey when I had for a number of years, because they didn't have someone full time in that position. Again, not a big staff. So again, very lucky, a very good organization. And then today, obviously, what they were trying to do at the time was get a new building built, and they were playing out of Brooklyn. We ended up back in the Coliseum, and now we're at UBS. So it's been quite a 10 years playing in three different venues,
Yeah.
but now in a beautiful that facility that's hosting the All-Star game next year, and everybody's excited about that.
I think it's one of my favorite buildings in the league. It's big, it's beautiful, so much space. The bars, the restaurants, the clubs that they have there. It's an awesome building, and they've got a great team there again. And I think one thing that you kind of touched on with the Niedermeyers, the Stevens, et cetera, in New Jersey, and to maybe a similar extent in New York. I think it's always been, from a fan perspective at least, you've had core and key guys there for so long, and kind of building that culture and shaping the culture through some interesting times with different arenas and such, whether that's, the Matt Martins, the Cizikas, the Clutterbucks, Boychuk's, Lee's, Josh Bailey's, et cetera. You mentioned a lot of them there. How important is keeping those kind of key pieces around through times where there's changes, or when Tavares ended up leaving town there, and that's a change to the leadership group, having those kind of core leadership on ice and off ice guys around the team. How much was that part of the philosophy of both your time in New Jersey and New York here, Chris?
Well, I think it's a big part. I think that change is inevitable, as they say. And what you try and do is you try and make sure that you have a core group of players all the time that you're able to build around and complement. And when you bring up Cizikas, Clutterbuck, and Martin, it's just as good as an example of a 20-person build. And, any of the teams that I've been around, and I don't think my dad's philosophy is any secret, that you need all 20 players. And then obviously you've got 5, 6, 7 players, ready to come in and, help at any point. Mike Rupp's an example. In 2003, plays one game in the finals and has 3 points in a 3-0 cup clinching game. So, but you have to have a core that you're always, working with and supporting around and building around, and you try and make sure that core group of players is as large as it can be. And I think it's critically important. I think that's always been part of the philosophy, and never to be in a rebuilding position. You want to be in a position where maybe there's years that your team is a little bit stronger and you add a little bit more at the trade deadline, and give up a little more to support that team and make a run. And some years you say, okay, I think we're good enough. We're going to be in the playoffs, but we might want to be a little bit more patient with our reserve list. We might want to make sure that we're not taking too much on from an asset standpoint where, the following season we're trying to recover too much from. So I think it is very important. And I think when you look at the age of the player, the core, that group, is still firing on all cylinders, or they're still maximizing their potential, or they're playing as close to that maximum potential as possible. You want to work with that. Like when Marty Berdeur's in net, you want to make sure you give yourself every chance to win because he's going to do that. He's still going to be playing at the best. And same thing in New York. I think when you're in a position when you have a core group, and when I joined the team, that core group was on the cusp. There was a lot of young players there that were starting to come into their prime. You think about Brock Nelson, and the Islanders always had a very good group of center icemen, and still do today. With the group of players with Bo and Matt and Casey and JG Pajot, and certainly with Danny Nelson on our reserve list, a Cal Ritchie who played with us last season. That's very important. So when you have that core, and you just try and expand it as large as you can, and then the goaltender, Ilya Sorokin, obviously we feel is one of the best goaltenders in the league. So when you look at that core group of players, that's what you get you excited, and you make sure you build around and with and for.
Absolutely, yeah. I think even just hearing some of those names, I'm sure Islanders fans are very excited for the season ahead here as well. I want to ask a little bit on the kind of talent and development side of things, Chris. I think a lot of times fans are quick to glorify stats in juniors or college or the AHL level. From your perspective, when dealing with an AHL team and NHL team, again, we touched on how much the game has changed and evolved. What's the gap, or what's the skill difference between the AHL and the NHL? How do you know when somebody's ready? What do you look for in a player to say, all right, this guy's ready for a shot with the big club?
Well, it's a really good question. I think if you start back when we're drafting these players, basically at 18 years old, some 17, you're drafting this potential. And there's a lot of things that go into that potential. Obviously, when you're lucky enough to be a draft a Matthew Schaefer and be in that position, you see nothing but potential, but you're also seeing reality as well. That player's got so much ability to do so many different things, and Matthew, as you've seen, was able to successfully transition that influence quickly, if not right away, as soon as he, put on an Islander jersey and signed. So you try and be patient, and you let the player tell you what he's ready for. And the best way I can explain that is when a player turns pro, they all have their successful past experiences. They also have identities which tell you why you drafted for them, and skill sets, or why you were interested in them and ended up drafting for them. What you look for is how quickly they are able to take that success that they had in previous stops and start to apply it at the pro level. So whether it's at the American League level, obviously we talked a little bit about Matthew Schaefer and development camp when he signed, and then training camp, and when they're around NHL players, and camp is the first time to see that. So they basically tell you what they're ready for. If there's a period of time, which again none of us know how long or short it's going to be, those successful qualities that they have, how quickly those qualities again start to contribute at the pro level. So we try and be patient, but we also need to put them in positions where they're challenged too. So sometimes a player may not be ready, or you may not think he's ready until he actually gets a chance. And when he does get a chance, then he further defines that time frame that you think he can start to contribute at the NHL level. So we never put a time frame on it. We always let the player tell us, what that is. We had a couple come into the league, American League last year. Cole Eiserman, Victor Eklund came in at the end of their seasons. Uh, Quinn Finley would have as well, but unfortunately finished hurt as Wisconsin. So that's just a few. So they get that initiation, if you will, that quick education at the end of the year that sets up their summer. And then when they come into training camp in the fall, then you look to see where have any of those players, just similar like you would see a first year player who just finished their first full season in the American League. And then again, whether it's the physiological development, whether it's just the experience, the education, that they have from playing with, and against pro players, the coaching, which is going to be a little bit different, the frequency of games, which is usually, a college player, it's going to be almost twice as many games. A junior player, it's going to be, probably 10 or 15 more games. So again, they're learning and their capacity to absorb all this information and then to apply it successfully with whatever their given skill sets are. Again, you look for that, and it's not necessarily going to be statistical. Part of it will be statistical, but you want to make sure that they're a reliable player on the ice, where a coach feels comfortable giving them responsibility, giving them minutes, and again, that just takes some time, and it does take experience. So obviously, we need to have opportunity for them to tell us if that can happen. And sometimes the last piece of information, we're just as anxious to see it when they do get the chance at the NHL, because again, they're going to tell us.
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective to hear. And again, you guys have a lot of that young talent in the pipeline now that I'm sure fans are excited to see from the Isermans and Eklunds and Aitchisons and Cal Ritchie, who I think is phenomenal. But you already know that. We touched on the move to Hamilton a little bit there. Another great logo, another great jersey, and a hockey mad city there in Hamilton. What does this summer look like for you guys, Chris, in terms of relocating the AHL team there to Hamilton? I would assume it's a very busy time on the business side of things, maybe a little bit more so than the hockey side of things right now.
Yeah, that's fair to say. And obviously, we've got a great partnership in the city of Hamilton and OVG, to like you mentioned earlier, bring hockey back to that market. Obviously, our focus is getting the team ready on the ice. We just finished development camp a couple of weeks ago. Our signings and what the reserve list and roster looking at this point for both teams is almost complete. So it's been a productive summer. But certainly the enthusiasm in Hamilton, Jay McKee being named head coach, who certainly has a history there, has had a lot of success in the OHL, and one of the stops certainly was in Hamilton. Great player in the NHL in his own right. Very excited about this opportunity, and for him taking on an American League position and the responsibility that comes with it. So it's been busy, but it's the good busy. It's the enthusiastic busy, the excitement busy, and certainly for the business team up in Hamilton, they're going 100 miles in the left lane there. So they're excited about everything, and I'm sure they're anxious, like all of us, to see the puck drop in October.
Absolutely. No, I know there's a lot of excited people there, both for the AHL team and the PWHL team to come to Hamilton. And Chris, this has been awesome. I can't thank you enough for the time, the insight here along the way. My last question for you, for anybody looking to break into the hockey operations side of things, what sort of advice would you give someone looking to make that their career, Chris?
Sure. Well, as you know, and we've touched on a little bit, there's so many different aspects of hockey operations now. You've got the technological aspect, obviously the hockey aspect, the diversity in these hockey operation groups. Just look on any website now, and you can look at all the different capacities and positions that are available. So the first thing I would say is stay open minded. Don't think that because you didn't play or because you didn't coach or scout that there may not be an opportunity for you. So I think as much education as you can complete is important. Making sure that technology is always present, and I think any industry right now is very important. But I think the biggest thing is to make sure that you know the game and the league. If you're speaking about hockey operations in the NHL, you want to follow the NHL. You want to make sure that you learn as much as you can about all the players and staff on the team, each organization. Take a look at how different maybe the divisions and the conferences are. You want to maybe look at the style of play that certain teams play compared to other teams. Take a look at a roster. How are these teams built? Where are the players from? Um, you talked before about when a player's ready. Look at the age of each team. Which players are getting minutes and how old are they? Were they drafted players? Were they traded players? Were they signed players? And I think if you do that, that gives you a base of knowledge. The other thing is you have to know what you would offer to someone. And what I mean by that is, what do you look for in a player? What do you think a successful player has as far as on and off ice qualities? Why would that player be someone that you should be interested in, whether it's via the draft, a signing, or a trade? Try and put together your own team, and maybe you put make the salary cap part of that component, and then where do you feel that a team we talked earlier about the Islanders, some of the Islander teams, and you mentioned Martin Cizikas and Clutterbuck. Well, what type of team would you build? Does a team have to have a certain element in certain categories? And what I mean by that is we look, and I look at basketball a little bit, hockey a little bit related. Do you want a LeBron James and Dwayne Wade, and do you want to go with a stronger group at the top of the lineup as opposed to, and having more minutes and then taper the minutes down? Or do you want to have a group that plays? I think that line would play 13, 14 minutes a game. Like how would you, basically program your own team, and how would you manage, how those players would play for you? I think that's, to me anyways, how I would look at it a little bit. Present, your organization to somebody, and basically create your own identity as a hockey person that you could impress upon someone, that if there is an opportunity to either interview or sit for a position, apply for a position that you're ready for. And part of that could be player profiles, team profiles, how you would construct an organization, and then what your role would be in that organization. And I think that's like a player. We all need to have roles. We all need to play to our strengths. And I think if you know who you are and you have an identity, then you're best able to present why you would be a valuable asset to an organization. So that would be my best answer, to that. And just like a player, there's so many different roles in hockey ops now that I do think there's opportunity for everyone. And I do think that there's a lot of diverse positions, and um, if you get all those people working together and they're fulfilling potential, then you get the best chance to have success.
I think that's phenomenal advice, Chris. And like we said earlier, for a bit of encouragement for everybody, there's never been more stats and information and video, etc., available. So definitely think that hockey operations is a highly desired path for a lot of our listeners and viewers here. And Chris, I can't think of anybody better to share their perspective and insights here. So I really appreciate the time. Best of luck with the new team in Hamilton, and enjoy the rest of your summer. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. You as well, and take care.